You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
We've got a caller on the line now, Daniel Tait. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Energy Alabama. He co-founded the organization in 2014 to accelerate the state's transition to sustainable energy. And he is on the line to talk to us about Alabama Power's ridiculous rates of profits compared to comparable utilities in other states, and the fact that they are now they're moving forward with plans to cut off power for poor people in Alabama in the midst of a pandemic. So, Daniel, thank you so much for calling in. We appreciate your time. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, I definitely appreciate the opportunity to speak. And yeah, I mean, you said it exactly right. I mean, Southern Company, which is the parent company of Alabama Power, and they also own, some other utilities like Georgia Power, Mississippi Power, and, some other types of affiliated entities around the greater Southeast. But it's an extremely profitable company, and as you mentioned, Alabama Power is actually either the or one of the most profitable utilities in the entire country. And I don't think it's a shock to y'all or any of your listeners that Alabama is one of the poorest states in the country, and that's been the case for quite some time. And so it's kind of a crazy juxtaposition, right? That you have some of the poorest residents in the country that are paying the highest utility bills in the country, supporting one of the most profitable utilities, and ultimately that money is being shipped out of Alabama and going to shareholders on Wall Street as opposed to regular folks here in the state. And so, I was talking about this the other day, and I think that's, when you, Jacob, and I were talking about it, just that last quarter alone, Southern Company, the parent company, made over $1.2 billion in profit, just profit in the last 3 months.
The last 3 months.
Meanwhile, just the last 3 months alone. Last year, it was like $4.7 billion for the total, net income, the net profit for Southern for 2019. And to put this in perspective for folks, right? Like when I talk about debt or cutting off people in the midst of a pandemic, Alabama is a black hole because our Public Service Commission doesn't actually hold the utilities accountable for their actions. But in Georgia, we have some data about how many people are behind and can't pay their bills, they're out of work, things like that. And we know that right now about $100 million, maybe a little bit more than that, of total bad debt is out there for customers in Georgia Power, which is a larger utility than Alabama. So I say all this to say that's a rounding error. If you think about their net profit being, $4.7 billion last year or $1.25 billion this last 3 quarters, they could forgive all of that debt, and it would barely even show on their reports, to Wall Street, to the investors.
That is so hard for me to wrap my head around, the fact that their profits, even that they could forgive all of the debt from poor and working people in Alabama, and it would be a rounding error on their profits from the last 3 months, not to mention the last year, but the last 3 months.
That's right. And then we also...
No, go ahead.
We also talk about, not only is the company itself obviously profiting off of poverty, which is just, again, a crazy assertion, but, some of the executives there are making out like bandits as well. I mean, last year, Tom Fanning, the CEO of Southern Company, he walked away with a record compensation of $28 million himself alone. So, I mean, he could take himself like a 50% pay cut, still make tens of millions of dollars, right? And we'd have thousands of people that could have their lights restored across the few states here in the Southeast.
That's insane. So what was his compensation again?
Last year it was about $28 million.
It was $28 million.
Wow.
This is a government protected private monopoly, I mean, like this may as well be tax money because they are a government protected monopoly, and the top person here at this company is making tens of millions of dollars off of our utility bills. And can you talk more about how Alabama fares as far as how much we pay in utilities and how much profit Alabama Power makes versus comparable states? Because that's something that really stuck out to me. The fact that we pay more and Alabama Power has a higher rate of profit than Georgia Power or than similar utilities in Mississippi.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, right? So the way it works is, like you said, we have these effectively government-backed monopolies. So the state of Alabama effectively gives Alabama Power, in this case, or Georgia Power, and across the country it's like this. This is not, just Alabama that does it this way. Because we didn't want, 100 years ago, we didn't want 15 electric grids running through people's neighborhoods. And we said, okay, well, it makes sense just to have, one set of infrastructure, one set of wires here, right? And we're going to make sure we regulate that one company because, as you know, and as listeners know, it's an American right to not like monopolies because of the abuses that we've seen throughout American history of what monopolies do to regular consumers. And so the idea was we're going to grant you a monopoly, but in exchange for stringent regulation to act as the placeholder for a market. You don't like a particular service in the market, you can just leave them. But you can't leave. If you're a resident of Birmingham and you want electricity, you paid this one company. That's it. Mm-hmm. You don't have another choice. You have to buy from them. And you look to your elected representative at the Public Service Commission to hold those companies accountable and make sure that they're actually doing what's in the public's interest. And so your second question, they're clearly not doing that because Alabama Power is one of the most profitable utilities in the country. So in the utility industry and in others, but we talk a lot about something called return on equity, and that is more or less a kind of a proxy for profitability. The higher the number, the more return on their assets they're allowed. In other words, profit on their assets and investments they're allowed to make. Alabama Power has, probably the highest of any investor-owned utility that I've ever seen. There may be, some random IOU out there that I haven't seen, but they are allowed to earn, between 13 and 14%, profit margin, just guaranteed. There is no risk to them. You can't go anywhere. And that's much higher than many other industries and much, much higher than even other utilities. So I, wrote an article for the Energy and Policy Institute, I don't know, maybe a few months ago, kind of analyzing this question a little bit more, right? Of, okay, well, not only is their profit margin and their rate high, but how much does that really hurt Alabamians, right? How much have we all paid on our utility bills for this largesse to Wall Street? And the number is pretty staggering. So between 2014 and 2018, I think it was 2014, so about a 5-year period, 2014 through 2019, the number was $1 billion in excess profit. So in other words, not just profit, but profit above kind of the national median for return on equity for other utilities. So if we look across the country and say, well, what's kind of the average profitability being awarded to those utilities? Alabama Power was well above that, and it was costing the average, account for Alabama Power about $700 over the course of a 5-year period. So, I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's a lot of money for regular folks.
Definitely. And you mentioned that, why is this a government-protected monopoly? Why do we want a monopoly here where, generally speaking, like you said, Americans are rightfully so skeptical about monopolies? And the reason is that it doesn't make sense to have, 3 or 4 or 5 or 11 different electrical grids. Like, it's just much more efficient to have one electrical grid. And so then to either the choices then are between a private monopoly and a public monopoly. Here in North Alabama, we have a public monopoly. We get our power through the TVA, which as you, I believe it was either in your tweet or in an article that I was reading about this, they mentioned that here in North Alabama, our utility rates are significantly lower than in the southern half of the state because they get their power from Alabama Power and we get our power from the TVA. And the TVA is a government monopoly. The TVA is a federal agency, and Alabama Power is a private agency. It's a private company that is regulated by the government. Now, that's not necessarily to say that can't work, but for it to work, we have to have regulators that are willing to do the job of regulation. We have to have government watchdogs keeping these private corporations, like keeping them on a leash, so to speak, so that they don't run wild with profits and stealing from us, basically. Stealing $1 billion in 4 years from working Alabamians. Can you talk a bit tell us what, and so the Public Service Commission is the entity that is supposed to do that with Alabama Power. Tell us a bit about the job description of the Public Service Commission, what they're technically supposed to do, and their record over the last over the last several years.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it. I mean, they're supposed to be the arbiter between the regular folks of the state and the utility company to determine what is fair, what is just and fair between the two, right? Because you can go to the extreme in either direction and the system collapses in the sense that if you do what we're currently doing, we're going to one extreme and saying that the shareholder is king, charge as much as you possibly can, disconnections, regular folks' ability to pay, economic development, effectively doesn't matter. We're gonna enrich the shareholder, right? And then that catches Alabama, keeps us in this persistent cycle of poverty, or at least doesn't help us get out of it because of how much money people are paying on a utility bill. But the inverse is true as well, right? In the sense that there has to be at least a healthy enough utility financially if you're going to have a private utility like this, as opposed to public, as you mentioned. It has to be healthy enough to exist. We don't want the utility company to go away. We need electricity, so we need them to be able to operate. And that Public Service Commission, right, is supposed to be the arbiter to say, what do we need to do to make sure the utility company can operate it and safely and reasonably and do what it's supposed to do so that when I turn my lights on, the lights actually come on, but also not in a way that sacrifices the well-being. And when I turn that light on, I'm automatically in a worse position than I would be had I not turned it on.
Right.
So it's my understanding that we've got, I hadn't followed this a whole lot. Jacob kind of brought it up to me, but I followed, Laura Casey, I believe is running for the Public Service Commission, and seen her post a lot over the past couple of years. And the Public Service Commission kind of hides behind closed doors, really, whenever they meet. And I've noticed the past 6 months, 9 months or so, she actually tried to record, bring in video, maybe her phone or something other like that, and just broadcast it to where the public can see what's going on here, which makes perfectly good sense. If they're representing the people of Alabama, you should be able to have some type of record of it, and they absolutely refused, shut her down.
They arrested her, right?
Yeah, and so it really speaks to what the Public Service Commission is, what they're doing right now. Apparently, they're afraid to let the public know, but there's no accountability there.
Yeah, the only accountability you have in Alabama, right, is through the ballot box. And you're exactly right. I was actually there at that meeting. They removed her and another woman from the meeting because they were live streaming, and she fought that all the way to the Alabama Supreme Court and lost. Right? I mean, it goes also to show how weak and
Corrupt.
Frankly,
Corrupt
worthless
is the
are
word.
open meetings. Yeah, well, that too, but also just, we have Open Meetings Act and Open Records law here in the state that is practically worthless. What's the point of having even an Open Meetings Act if you can't even have an open meeting?
Yeah.
So those things need to be reformed as well. But, to your point about accountability, in a case where you have an elected public service commission, your only real accountability is at the ballot box. But it's not just, I want people to understand that it's not just with the Public Service Commission, because the Public Service Commission was created by the legislature. So ultimately, it is responsible to the Alabama legislature. And if the Alabama legislature decides that the Public Service Commission, as it's currently structured, is not doing its job, is not holding the interest of the people at heart and wants to make changes, it can do so. It has the ability to make wholesale changes to the Public Service Commission, or to even pass laws that override or change decisions of the Public Service Commission. So it is not like if something is done at the PSC, it's the end all be all. We all vote for people at the State House and the State Senate who ultimately can also hold these folks accountable as well.
Right.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part about that, it sounds like, is if Laura actually does win this the race, that and she begins making public a lot of the things that's going on, it sounds like the legislature has the authority to come in and shut her down as well, which is the terrible part about this. You can get good people in there, it sounds like, and still these corporate bootlickers down in Montgomery can still come in and shut them down.
So
well, that's right. I mean, if you look at the way the current system is structured, it is structured to benefit the monopoly, right. and that in this case is Alabama Power, or if you're a gas customer, it's Spire Alabama, right? So it is created, it is done, and it has kind of morphed itself over the course of many decades, so that attempts at reform are going to be long, hard slogs get done. They're not going to happen overnight because there are all these levers of influence and power that these monopoly entities have. And a big one that we haven't even talked about is campaign contributions, right? So not only are they taking all this excess profit from us, but what do they do with those excess profits? Well, they buy politicians.
Right. Yeah. So we can talk about the race a little bit. Twinkle Kavanaugh is the Republican that is running. Her campaign is entirely funded by Alabama Power, right?
No, in Alabama, it's actually illegal, as in most states, for utility companies to give directly to the regulators. So, Alabama Power is legally prohibited from donating directly to anyone running for that race. But we have documented, or I have documented in other states and delving into Alabama data right now. But there are many ways around that, right? You can give to PACs that then turn around and give. And there are a lot of affiliated interests that do so. And in this particular race, there's a lot of coal money that's flying into it as well.
So, like I said, she's the Twinkle is the Republican that's running. She's been there since 2010, I believe. What is she saying about this? The fact that Alabama Power has one of the highest profits of any utility company in the nation, that they have taken $1 billion in excess profits from Alabamians, that they're about to disconnect thousands of working and poor Alabamians from power during the middle of a pandemic, during the middle of winter. That Laura Casey was arrested at a Public Service Commission meeting for trying to enlighten the public on what is going on at our service commission. What is she saying about all this?
She seems pretty happy with her record, from what I can tell. She often will talk about the fact that Alabama has lower than the national average on our electric rates. And so there's this dichotomy, right, that people are using language to hide the truth. And this is an example of that, right? Alabama is just slightly under the national average when it comes to how much we pay per kilowatt hour. But we use a ton of energy. Number one, obvious because it's our climate, but Alabama's climate is not that much different than Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, or for that matter, it's even hotter in Florida, right? So it's not like we're an outlier in terms of the climate because we're Hawaii. We're not. But we have extremely high utility bills. So I always argue to folks that, the rate, while it's important, is not what really matters. What matters is the number that comes on people's bills at the end of the day. What do they have to pay? And that is driven by the rate times the consumption. Our consumption is so high because of climate, but also because we've made terrible policy decisions that encourages the utility company to sell more and more and more, whereas other states have invested in a lot of conservation and energy efficiency, distributed generation like solar at the residential and small commercial level for local small businesses to help reduce how much we have to buy, right? And drive bills down, because those save money both for the people who do them, but also for all ratepayers. Because if we don't need to build new gas plants like Alabama Power just did, that would have saved customers $1.5 billion. But no, we had to build a new power plant because we didn't invest in efficiency. So she seems pretty happy with that record. She thinks that they're being open and transparent, that they have low rates, and that it's just because it's hot here that bills are high.
And one of the things that I've read in the past year that really just irks me is the fact that if you as a homeowner want to begin trying to break free of this monopoly and install solar panels on your house or at your business, that they put a tax, that Alabama Power actually puts a tax on your electric bill to try to discourage you from doing that. And it's insanity.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, if you think about the at least stated ethos of this state, right, of being the fan of markets, being the fan of low taxation, being the fan of property rights, all of that was thrown completely out the window to do favors for Alabama Power here. And so Alabama Power has, at least the highest I've been able to find, tax on solar in the country. Advocates in the state and clean energy advocates in the state, including Energy Alabama, that I work for, attempted to challenge that and get it changed. And of course, Alabama Power came back and said, we should raise the tax, and the Public Service Commission agreed. So, yeah, I mean, if you think about it, regular folks who are trying to take these decisions into their own hands for their small business or their home and their family, they're rewarded, with extra taxes that don't exist in other states. I mean, let's be honest here. Georgia Power, the sister company of Alabama Power, tried the same shenanigans with the Georgia Public Service Commission, who is also all Republican, by the way. And they didn't even do it. Like the Georgia Commission effectively told them to get out of here with that.
Yeah. Daniel,
that's not going to fly next door.
We're coming up on a hard break for the top of the hour news, but we're going to bring you on for just a couple more minutes after that. Are you okay to stay on? All right. We'll talk more to Daniel after the break. Stay tuned. This is the Valley Labor Report. All right, folks, welcome back to the Valley Labor Report. Today is the Alabama AFL-CIO Open Line Saturday. No ads, courtesy of the Alabama AFL-CIO, besides the hard breaks at the bottom and the top of the hour. So we're going long today, and if you want to give us a call, 1-866-494-9866 is the number. On the line right now, though, we've got Daniel Tait. He is the Chief Operating Officer for Energy Alabama. He founded that organization in 2014 to help speed Alabama's transition to sustainable energy. And I'll let you pick up where you left off on the other side of the break, Daniel.
Yeah, we were just talking about the tax, right, on solar, and being that it just is completely antithetical to everything that Alabama claims it stands for when it talks about low taxation and, free markets and customer choice and property rights and things like that. So, I was just mentioning that the Georgia Power had tried to do the same thing, which is, of course, Alabama Power's sister company next door, and that commission basically kind of laughed them out the door and said, you're not gonna try that here. But our commission seemed to be quite happy to comply.
Right. And no, go ahead.
I was going to say, so it's interesting, you said that they can't donate directly to, that Alabama Power, a corporation that's been can't donate to the regulators of that entity. But of course, with Citizens United and all the dark money that flows through PACs, we know that that's easily gotten around. But they can donate to legislators, I assume, governors, secretaries of state, and things like that. Have you done any research at all? I know I'm kind of hitting you blind on this, but to see how much, if any at all, Alabama's Power is donating to legislator campaigns or governor campaigns or anything like that?
Or PACs.
Or that's true, or PACs. I don't know that they have to report PACs, but.
Yeah. Well, I would tell you that I don't have a specific number completely off the top of my head right now, but, yes, they can donate to basically everybody else or anybody else and issues and things like that.
So they could donate to the legislators that create the regulation, the Public Service Commission.
That's correct. Yes, and they do. Right. So they are one of, while I couldn't give you an exact number off the top of my head, they are one of, if not the largest donors in the state of Alabama. And I think anybody who walks the house, the halls of the State House would tell you that, Alabama Power is probably the most influential and powerful entity in the state.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. Daniel, thank you so much for calling in. I feel like this has been a very informative discussion. And folks, like we mentioned, there is a race on the ballot for the Public Service Commission. The president of the Public Service Commission, the incumbent is Twinkle Kavanaugh. The challenger is Laura Casey. Laura Casey's a Democrat, but folks, the Public Service Commission doesn't have anything to say about abortion, doesn't have anything to say about immigration, any of these, none of those social issue type stuff. The only thing that the Public Service Commission has control of is regulating the utilities. So just think about that when you go to the ballot box. Don't think about whether there's an R or a D next to their name. Think about who is going to be better for working Alabamians.
Yeah, well, think about who has been detrimental for working Alabamians the last 10 years.
One of them's got a record.
Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel, thanks so much for calling in. Where can people find you and follow up more on some of this information?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. EnergyAlabama.org is our website, and that's where you can find work that we're doing here in the state of Alabama. And, of course, that's the same handle across all social channels, Facebook and Twitter. And if you'd like to see my personal rantings on Twitter, it's at Tait, Taitdl, often talking about utilities and monopoly issues there as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been very informative, and I think it's something that most of these citizens of Alabama have no clue what the PSC is, and they need to be a little bit more educated on it.
Yeah. All right, Daniel.
Sure.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
calling
gentlemen.
So much.
All right. So again, folks, that was Daniel Tait. He is the Chief Operating Officer for Alabama, or Energy Alabama. You can find him and Energy Alabama stuff on Facebook, Twitter, etc., etc. They do lots of really good work. Around these sorts of issues, making sure that Alabamians are that they know what's going on. So, make sure that you're following them. They're doing some really good work. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate your time. If you want to see what we're up to throughout the week and get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist. That's spelled RADICL Unionist. If you missed part of the show and want to go back and watch it later, search YouTube for The Valley Labor Report and subscribe to our channel. You can go back and watch the full show there, and we also clip segments throughout the week. And we also upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps. So you can see if we're on your listening platform of choice. You can go to The Valley Labor Report. www.transistor.fm/subscribe. And if you appreciate our work and want to help us stay on the air, then consider throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report.